All right, so language things. I've called this little set of videos language thinks, and I'm going to make a series about the series of them because they're all about this idea that if you use language, it's almost sometimes like it has a mind of its own. It can help you generate ideas, but sometimes you need to learn how to use it in order to make that happen. So it's called Language Thinks, using language as a tool for thought in the English classroom. And this first video is just the introduction, basically the ideas that underpin this and an example about why I think it works. The aim or the reason or the learning intention here is that I want to be able to demonstrate that the role of language in the English classroom is more than just an object of study, and it's more than just a means of communication. um, I want people to be able to understand that language is this amazingly powerful tool for promoting and developing and enhancing student abstract thought in ways that we quite often neglect, and sometimes that are so simple to actually implement in the classroom. So basically, we need to move beyond this idea that language is just there to help us to record our ideas. And and we need to understand that if we know how to use it properly, it can actually help us to generate whole new ideas, to expand our ideas, to help us navigate into unimagined paths of conceptual thought. The famous philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once said that the limits of my language are the limits of my mind. All I know is what I have words for. So, based on this idea of language sort of creating the limitations of what you can do with your mind, it makes sense that if you expand the language, you can expand what you can do with your mind. So, I've kind of presented here two different, I guess, kind of simplified versions of the relationship between thought and language. I'm not really advocating anyone because I have no idea what came first, thought or language. But these are just ways to help us think about the way that language and thought interact, so that we can better use it to help our students. The first version is that we use language to record our ideas. So basically, we have an idea, and then we get a bit of language, and we stick it on a page, and we're done. That's language communicating thought. But that bothers me. I feel like there's more to language than just that. And when you use language a lot, you start to discover that it's not just recording your ideas. It has some kind of power over the ideas. It has some kind of life of its own. So a second version is that we use language to generate new ideas. So it doesn't mean that we don't come up with our own ideas, but what it does mean is that as soon as we use language to try and organize those ideas, or to express those ideas, or to condense them, or whatever it is that we want to do with them, it somehow changes those ideas, and not in a bad way. It actually can sort of help to generate new ones. It's almost like language becomes the catalyst here for generating new ideas. So you start with an idea, you feed it into language, language does its magic, and it gives you new ideas. And from there, you can generate even more new ideas. All right, so my ideas, or the basic theory behind this series of videos, comes from the idea of semiotic mediation, which is the theory, one of the theories of the Russian psychologist Vygotsky, and also the work of the linguist Michael Halliday and the people of the Functional Grammar School of Linguistics, this idea of what's called social semiotics. Pretty much, in terms of semiotic mediation, the idea is that signs are tools for mediated behaviour. They enhance our ability to engage in particular modes of abstract thinking. So if you think about signs being like being like physical tools, in the sense that just as when human beings first discovered that they can make tools and use those tools to manipulate the physical world, all of a sudden they could do things that they couldn't do previously. And that was really important for the evolution of human beings. In the same way, when we discovered that we could use signs to represent our thoughts, all of a sudden that promoted this massive shift in what we were able to do as a species, and it meant that we as a species were able to think in far more abstract ways. And just as a species we can do that, as individuals we can use language to do that too. The idea of social semiotics, the main idea that I'm drawing on here is that complex relationship between culture and language, that culture is realized through language, and that means that everything in a culture, all the ideas, all the thoughts and beliefs and attitudes that are unique to that culture are available through the language. So as we learn the language, we learn the culture, but it also means that we can actually actively learn or use that language as a means of accessing all of those ideas that are available through that culture. So pretty much the reason why I'm sharing this is because of the potential that I see in the way that we approach our teaching and how that can then help the students. Because if students are able to use language in this far more agentive way, they're able to then gain insight into the constructedness of the text that they're engaging with, and then develop far more sophisticated understandings of those texts, but also of the ideas within those texts. Students are then also able to, once they know how these texts work, they're also then able to challenge those dominant readings and to explore alternate perspectives and points of view. They're basically able to unpack the text and look at the way that they're being told it works, but also look at the way it could work. Find those holes and those gaps in the meaning and exploit them. It also means that it becomes far more generative. It gives students the opportunity to adapt and appropriate the language of a text and structures to explore their own new ideas, and to come up with new types of texts, and to use those new types of text to explore and generate and develop and organize new ideas and concepts. Finally, it gives them the opportunity to identify and subvert the implicit ideologies, all the ideas that are built into a text that quite often go unquestioned, that go unnoticed, and that are essential to a particular discourse. And once they start to recognize those and subvert them, they're able to then provoke dialogue. And through dialogue, we are able to explore new possibilities. So here I feel like it's important to give you a practical example to kind of help you understand where I'm coming from. So if we think about the way we often use language when we're trying to communicate something, whether it's we're writing something or we're talking to a friend and we're trying to look for particular words to express an idea, but we can't find those words. There's just the right word isn't available. We feel like we're restricted. We feel like there's not enough words, or that if there are other words, we don't know what they are. So we go and we look for other words. And sometimes when we do that, we have this pleasant discovery that there's actually more than what we actually hope for. We look for one word and we find 3 words. And in those 3 words, we realize that there are finer distinctions in meaning that we didn't even know existed. And the other thing is that we quite often we find the words that give that give us new ideas. So, we might see that there are three different possibilities, and then we go, well, hey, why not a fourth possibility, or why not a combination of option one and option two? So, an example of this. In sort of, looking at the idea of existentialism and all of those kinds of philosophical ideas that you tend to come across in senior studies of English literature, there's always this idea about fear of death. So is there a word to describe that niggling, unpleasant uneasiness that you get seemingly out of nowhere when you remember that one day you are going to die, and it's quite possible that there's nothing else after death, and probably in 100 years no one will even care that you were even alive. And well, what's the point then, really, anyway? So in trying to explain this kind of preoccupation with individual existence and the point of existence and all of those kinds of things, we need the words to be able to describe them. These next three slides I've taken using the content from a website called Mental Floss. You can see the links to that website down the bottom there. It's got a nice sort of explanation of the difference between these ideas. So the first one is angst, or existential dread. It's German for fear. And the question that Mental Floss puts to us is, are you dissatisfied and worried in an introspective, overthinking German way? If so, you've got angst. The contender number 2 is ennui. Existential boredom, or French for boredom. I apologize if my pronunciation of any of these words is incorrect. But are you tired? So tired of everything about the world and the way it is? Do you proclaim this with long, slow sigh to everyone around you? If so, you've got ennui. Third option is Weltschmerz, or German for world pain. Do you have sadness in your heart for the world that can never be, and sensible shoes? You've got Weltschmerz. Now, in looking for one word to describe that unpleasant feeling, we've actually stumbled across 3 different words. And each of those words actually defines something slightly different. And we start to realize that there are much finer distinctions in the types of feelings. So we not only realize that there are 3 words, we also realize that there are 3 different feelings that we could be having. So in building vocabulary, it's increasing conceptual understanding in terms of the breadth, so the how many different ideas in terms of how they span across different fields, but also in terms of the depth, so in what you understand about each of those terms, or those concepts, I should say, and about the way that we can start to make those finer distinctions between different aspects of the same concept. And so here we've got a really simple example of the way that language is actually a tool for thinking. We've used language as a way of actually developing our conceptual understanding.